Okay. Yeah, so Spider-Man Lotus. I'm really not a fan. Now, I'm going to get straight to the point and just address the elephant in the room here. I did my absolute best to address and just take in this film without incorporating any prior biases based off the ongoing controversies regarding this fan film. So just so you know, all thoughts and opinions that I have about this are going to be 100% my own, and they've all been made without any influence from the controversy from the director and the lead actor. I formulated all my opinions on this movie just solely for myself as a Spider-Man fan and just a lover of movies in general. But without any further ado, let's get into this. I have a fair bit of things that I want to say. Obviously, I said at the beginning of this video that I am not a fan, but I will give props where props are due. There are a fair few things that I did really like that they did in this movie. And we're gonna start off with probably the best thing, and that is the suit. This suit definitely ranks up there with my all-time favorite suits that I've ever seen for Spider-Man put to a screen, just visually. If I were to include it in any of my suit rankings, it would definitely be neck and neck with the TASM 2 suit. This suit looks like it was directly pulled off the page of one of the comics with John Romita Sr.'s artwork of the webhead. It was definitely a visually refreshing take on the character, and just when I picture to see Spider-Man on screen, that is pretty much what I want to see. It's Spider-Man's actions and just the things that come out of his mouth is where I have a serious problem, but we'll talk about that later on in the video when we talk about the bad. Some more good things about this movie is definitely the score. That kind of goes without saying. This score is very impressive, especially coming from a fan film. That score that's playing during the final swing scene is just so good. I get little nods to all three of the composers for each of the three Spider-Man respectfully, and there's even a cool little Easter egg theme from the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s, which I thought was amazing. Now I want to talk about the fight scenes, and I do want to say for what they are, from a fan film perspective, I kind of had to take like a big multi-million-dollar budget movies perspective out of the opinion, but for what they are for a fan film, they're pretty darn awesome. The swinging scenes also rank up there with some of the best that I've ever seen since TASM 2, but we just didn't get enough of them. But that was obviously kind of to be expected because of the budget. They only had a little over $100,000 to work with, and I think I can guess that a fair chunk of the budget definitely went towards the CGI for those scenes. Now, one of the last things that I actually liked about this movie was definitely the key word here is some of the scenes that Spider-Man had with the kid in this movie. The kid's name is obviously Tim Harrison, which is a direct replication of The Amazing Spider-Man issue 248, and a little bit of a callback to the 90s animated series once again, where Spider-Man visits the terminally ill little girl. There was quite a bit of heartfelt moments, but there was a fair few amount of these scenes that I just was not a fan of. But those are all the things that I enjoyed. Now let's move on to the bad. Possibly my biggest gripe with this movie is that it is way too damn depressing. And I get it. Not every aspect of Spider-Man is going to be all sunshine and rainbows. There's some very dark moments in the comics, the films, the TV shows, all of it. But just think about it. In this movie, they covered Gwen Stacy's death, they covered Norman Osborn's death, and then they even covered the death of the kid. I had to stop and just take a breather and just rethink my mental health because of how depressing this movie is. And that kind of leads me into my next big issue with this, and that is like the whole direction that they went with Peter. There were some moments, especially with the kid, where he was just acting totally out of character. I know in the comics and in the animated series, Peter was really contemplating giving up being Spider-Man for good, and that the kid is kind of the key to bringing him back to the light and just reigniting that passion for being Spider-Man, but the way they did it in this movie, it was so unearned. In a way, it wasn't really the kid that brought him back. It was just being reamed out by his mom to make him realize that what he was doing was wrong. He was ready to literally walk out on the kid. He basically told him that he's not a worthy role model to be following. And as he's about to leave, his mom kind of pulls him aside and is like, "You're the last thing my son has in this world to look up to. And you better march back in there and make it right." It's just like, seriously? Like, that is just not Peter Parker, for me at least. Another thing that really drove me crazy was the inconsistent pacing of this movie. And like the main cause of that was the unnecessary Harry and MJ scenes. They went the route with Harry overdosing on drugs and that he's kind of in a dark place now that his father's dead, but they just went on such a weird rabbit hole with him. There were entire scenes of him just moping around New York City, going to his father's grave in the pouring rain, just making it seem so dramatic and just, it didn't really lead anywhere. I get that they had to add stuff in to kind of further the story, but the problem is that it didn't further the story at all. Harry didn't face any troubles or challenges to pull himself out of this. He kind of just got over it. I don't really know what the writers were thinking in terms of Harry and MJ, but they just had no clear sense of direction to what they wanted to do with them. They were just there for straight filler, to be honest. Going back to Peter for a little bit, this is definitely more of a Peter Parker story than a Spider-Man story. And now that's not necessarily bad, but I talked about it a little bit already. It's just the way they did things with Peter that I really didn't like. And we barely got any real Spider-Man stuff, and I understand the budget thing once again, but it's definitely more of a Peter Parker story than a Spider-Man story. That's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's just the way it all panned out, and it just didn't work for me, really. The last thing that I really had a problem with, and actually this might be more of a big problem than the depressing stuff, and that was there was way too many damn flashbacks in this. There were so many times where I didn't even know what was the present because we were just going back to prior events way too many damn times. The only good thing that came out of the flashbacks was the little goblin fight we had. That was kind of cool. The goblin costume is very freaky and I kind of like it. But there was just so many different things that made this film so confusing. And yeah, I think that's probably my biggest gripe with the movie overall. My final thoughts on Spider-Man Lotus are, in my opinion, pretty fair. I'd say this is definitely not a good movie in any standard, but when it comes to fan films, it's a decent fan film, especially for what their budget allows. But even putting the budget aside, just the writing, the acting, and just the whole direction that this movie went to, it's just not very good in my opinion. It definitely had potential to be good. It's not the overall concept or story that was the problem. It was mostly just the execution. I have no doubt that the team definitely poured their heart and soul into the character and just the movie as a whole. I'm certainly not discrediting any of that. Any filmmaker that can successfully put their dream and their vision onto a screen has my respect. But just because you have my respect doesn't mean I have to like the content that you put out there. And this is just one of those cases, in my opinion, that not all fans should be writing these types of stories and be filmmakers. They certainly have a lot of potential, don't get me wrong. I know this is a lot of their first projects working on a movie, but at this point in time, in my opinion, it's just not very good, especially from a Spider-Man standpoint. But it wasn't an absolute complete disaster. There were a few things that definitely had potential, and I think if they keep working at it, they'll definitely get a lot better and where they really want to be. But guys, that's going to do it for my full review on the controversial fan film of Spider-Man Lotus. Be sure to let me know down below in the comment section whether or not you liked this movie or didn't like it. Also, be sure to give your thoughts on the recent controversy that surrounds the director / writer and the lead actor as Peter Parker. I definitely want to hear all of your guys' thoughts, so definitely make sure to join me down below in the comments. Hit that red subscribe button if you love content about all things Spider-Man. Thank you all so much for watching. See ya, chumps.
See ya, chump.